I haven't been watching myself this entire time, and I just turn on the camera and I realize how fucking exhausted I look. This is what happens when you are interested in Les Mis. Don't do it if you haven't read the book already. I recently saw a Tumblr post by Tumblr user Jondrette Girls that says, George Blagden makes up for not being an ugly enough grandeur by being completely insane. And I couldn't stop thinking about it, and now we're here today. I originally intended for this video to solely be about British actor George Blagden, but I can't shut up when it comes to Les Miserables, so this video is actually more of a fandom history of Les Miserables, told specifically to explain the various spiraling effects that George Blagden has had on the modern fandom, along with things that are probably completely unrelated to Blagden, but hold the honor of having occurred alongside of his influence over the fandom. On a deeper level, this video is an excuse for me to talk about Les Miserables for an uncomfortable amount of time and an attempt to archive information about the fandom. Don't worry, you don't need to know much about Les Miserables in order to watch this video, because I will summarize Les Miserables for you in excruciating detail. I will give you everything that you need to understand how we got to the point where there could even be a modern Les Miserables fandom to start with. And then I will explain to you how I think certain tropes exist within the fandom specifically due to George Blagden accepting a role of a side character in one of the various adaptations of the book. But first, some housekeeping. I'm here to explain a phenomenon that I've witnessed and hopefully preserve fandom history. This is not a video criticizing George Blagden or fandom tropes. Let me be clear. When I call this man insane, I say this with respect. We're all going to sit here and listen to me say a bunch of names, phrases, and words using my very intense Anglophone accent, and we're going to be super cool about it. We're all going to come to terms with it, and we're going to be totally chill about the fact that I cannot pronounce these words. I would like to present my credentials to the jury. I've read this book multiple times. It's at least 6. I'm actually in the midst of what I think is my 7th reread. It's actually in an audiobook form. I have seen far too many film and television adaptations of this thing. I've seen the musical on Broadway and in my own city when it came on a tour. Twice I've seen it on stage. And the thing is, I don't even like the musical, but I will be sat if the opportunity presents itself. In 2018, I went to Paris by myself, and I did a self-guided Les Miserables tour in which I went to locations in Paris mentioned in the book, including places that don't exist, but people have figured out their approximate locations based on descriptions provided in the book. I went to the alleyway where the book barricade was supposed to be, and I drank coffee across the street from it at like 8:30 a.m. thinking about it. I spent my honest-to-God 21st birthday contemplating Javert by the Seine. Do you know how down bad you have to be over a book to do shit like that? I've been in this fandom for far too long, and I'm still here. These are my credentials that I present to you before I even begin. Hello, this is Editing Taylor with a terminology note that I forgot to mention. If at any point in the video I mention the brick, I am referring to the book. It's commonly called the brick because the physical edition of the book is approximately the size of a brick. So it's not just me, it's the fandom in general. This is the brick. Les Miserables is an epic historical novel written by Victor Hugo and published on March 31st, 1862. Hugo began writing the book in 1845, and between beginning to write the book and its actual publication, Hugo had a rather politically active life, participating in the 1848 Paris Uprising and exiling himself from France to Guernsey in 1851, after his opposition to Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte proved to be dangerous. For those who don't know much about 19th century France, I'm not talking about OG Napoleon. I'm talking about his nephew, who was president of France between 1848 and 1851, then emperor from 1852 until being deposed in 1870, and also the last monarch of France. The manuscript for Les Miserables was almost lost in his move to Guernsey, but his mistress, Juliette Drouet, managed to save it. Hugo continued to write in Guernsey and later Belgium when he finished it overlooking the battlefield of Waterloo. I think that this is important to note because his exile in Paris, in my opinion, informs some of the more romantic descriptions of Paris in the book. Hugo takes care to describe exact locations, mentioning changes that have been made to the area since the moment described in the novel, and adding in small details that are unnecessary to the plot but provide a very careful, tender vision of the region during this tumultuous time. Les Miserables is a book chock full of historical information and digressions, something Hugo is very well known for. Digressions take over a quarter of the book and are scattered throughout. While they don't necessarily advance the plot, they provide some valuable insight into the setting, context of certain events, and are sometimes seemingly just there to show off how much random shit Hugo knew. Perhaps the most famous is the digression on the Parisian sewer system, which is used to set up a scene where, well, the characters are in the sewer. The digressions also clue you into where he was mentally and also physically when he wrote portions of the book. For example, the 19 chapters dedicated to the Battle of Waterloo, where Victor Hugo visited the famed battlefield in 1861 and finished writing the novel. If you think that I go off on too many digressions in this video, remember that I am a fan of Les Miserables. You don't simply read this book over and over again if you don't like a good old digression. I will be doing it, and this is your warning. Les Miserables draws heavily on events Hugo either experienced himself or experienced the aftershocks of. For example, Hugo witnessed an incident in 1829 between three strangers and a police officer, which involved a man being hauled off for stealing bread while a mother and daughter watched on. He began to imagine the lives of these people and then took inspiration from the life of ex-convict Eugène Vincent Vidocq to create Jean Valjean, the main character of Les Miserables. In 1832, Hugo witnessed some of the barricades of the failed June Rebellion. In 1841, he apparently stopped a sex worker from being arrested for assault, and he also apparently used some of the actual conversation he had in that experience when writing a certain scene involving the character of Fantine. Perhaps the most insane example of Hugo's life seeping into the book, Marius and Cosette's wedding night, which takes place on the 16th of February 1833, is also the day when Hugo and his lifelong mistress Juliette Joulet made love for the first time. Do with that what you will. Publication of Les Miserables was highly anticipated, as Hugo was already incredibly famous at that time. Publication was announced in 1860, and Hugo forbade publishers from summarizing the book. I mean, I guess how could they summarize it properly? Reception was initially rocky. Many critics were unhappy with Hugo's sympathies towards revolutionaries, and some claimed his focus on social issues was immoral and oppositional to art. Regardless, it was a commercial success, and we've seen how things have gone from there. But now that I've talked your ear off about the writing and publication, what is Les Miserables about? Les Miserables follows the story of ex-convict Jean Valjean after he completes his prison sentence in Toulon, and promptly enters a new type of prison, having his soul bought for God in a way, and dedicating the rest of his life to Christianity, promoting good deeds, and helping people, where he could kind of make up for some of his past transgressions and stop himself from slipping into a sort of rage against society that always seems to be bubbling inside of him. The story follows the wild twists and turns of his life, as well as the interesting cast of characters he meets throughout this incredibly turbulent time of early 19th century France. But I think this summary is a bit of an oversimplification, because while Jean Valjean's the main character, he's not the character the story hinges on. He isn't even the character who's on the book cover most of the time. You see, the story actually hinges entirely on Cosette, with the story being told through Jean Valjean as a way to explain and describe the events to Cosette as she comes of age. Les Miserables, at its core, is about how no one fell from the coconut tree and everyone exists within the context.
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context.
To understand one character, you have to understand a character who previously impacted them. And to understand that character, you have to understand yet another character who previously impacted them. It's a constant chain of character arcs, and the book constantly backtracks to show you a miniature character arc that helps make sense of the main arcs that you are seeing. To understand Jean Valjean, you must understand Bishop Myriel. To understand Bishop Myriel, you must understand Conventionalist G. To understand Conventionalist G, you must understand French history like in general. Every event Jean Valjean experiences in the story either leads up to him encountering Cosette and adopting her, or happens because of his connections to Cosette. The only reason we reach the climax of the story, the failed June Rebellion of 1832, is because of Cosette. At this point in the book, we are following both Jean Valjean and Marius, whose actions are influenced by their relationship to Cosette. Marius is at the barricade because he's suicidal due to Cosette's impending departure from Paris, which is of course due to a lot of characters interacting at the Gorbeau house. Eponine is at the barricade because of Marius and Cosette. Jean Valjean is there to save Marius for the sake of Cosette. Because Jean Valjean is there for us readers to see the events through, we get to see the conclusions of character arcs for Javert, as well as the demise of Les Amis de la ABC. I'm sorry about my pronunciation for this one in particular. You're just gonna have to deal with this one. Les Amis de la ABC are a fledgling revolutionary group made up of primarily young students from southern France. This group is described as being close friends, and they appear several times in the story of Marius Pontmercy, but take more of a central role during the June Rebellion portion of the book. The June Rebellion, also known as the Paris Uprising of 1832, was a real anti-monarchist uprising attempted by French Republicans. It had its origins in the July Rebellion of 1830, which is also known as the Second French Revolution. This uprising led to the overthrow of King Charles X, the French Bourbon monarch, who rose to the throne after the defeat of Napoleon, and the ascent of his cousin, Louis-Philippe, Duke of Orléans, who would be monarch of France until 1848 when he was deposed. And power would ultimately be transferred to Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte, Victor Hugo's biggest op. This was a time period of massive political turmoil in France. Of course, when wasn't France in massive political turmoil during the long 19th century? During this time, material conditions in France worsened significantly, which, you know, is something Les Miserables is about. In spring 1832, alongside with everything else going on, there was a massive cholera outbreak in Paris, which is brought up in the book several times as being a tension point. General Jean-Maximilien Lamarck died on the 1st of June in 1832 due to cholera. Lamarck was a critic of Louis-Philippe I and the constitutional monarchy formed after 1830, which he argued did not benefit the people. He also promoted French support of revolutionary movements in other European countries, such as Poland and Germany, and he was a popular figure for radicals for these reasons. His death due to cholera was a catalyst for the June 1832 rebellion. It occurred between June 5th and June 6th of 1832 and was led by a series of secret societies of politically active Republicans alongside Parisian workers and refugees from Poland, Germany, and Italy. As I mentioned earlier, Hugo actually witnessed parts of this uprising himself. He memorialized it in Les Miserables 30 years later. Because of Les Mis, this rebellion that would have likely fallen out of memory, given that it failed, is remembered again and again through the book itself, through stage, film adaptations, and more.
We're in the ABC Cafe. We're all on edge and we're all preparing, getting our guns ready, bullets ready, cleaning the guns. I've been put on poster duty. They don't actually trust me with a gun, so they've given me a stamp instead.
Hey, camera mark.
Les Amis de la ABC are a fictional secret society that, in the book, participate in this non-fictional uprising. The core group consists of Enjolras, Combeferre, Courfeyrac, Jehan, Joly, Bossuet, Bahorel, Feuilly, and Grantaire. The group itself is a reference to the Society of Rights of Man, which was a radical Republican group formed during the July Revolution of 1830. It was a nationwide organization with, I guess I'd describe them as affiliated chapters, although I don't think that's really accurate, with each chapter having between 10 to 19 members, specifically to circumvent laws that required permits for organizations of over 20 members. The Society of Rights of Man organized the June Rebellion that took place during Lamarck's funeral. I should also note here that Les Amis de l'ABC are named as such in the book as a pun. Pardon my pronunciation, but ABC in French sounds similar to abaissé, which translates to the abased, humiliated, and degraded. Literally, they're the friends of the abased. Grantaire is implied to be born sometime around 1803 in southern France and dies on the 6th of June 1832 in Paris. Despite being a core member of this band of radicals, he exists almost in the margins of the group because he isn't truly there for the politics. Grantaire is characterized in the novel as a skeptical, incredibly intelligent man who is almost constantly drunk and has a tendency to go on long-winded rants and is pretty much constantly in the midst of making a sex joke. He's described as being that friend who knows where all the best spots are for everything in the city, as well as having a rich slew of hobbies, an educational experience in boxing, dancing, and being a gymnast. He also has a very intense interest in classical Greek and Roman mythology, which he references constantly within his rants and in comments he makes to the rest of the cast. In short, he is annoying, which I say with affection. Editing Taylor hopping in again because I don't think I really hammered home how fucking annoying he is as a character. Like, when I say he goes on long-winded rants, it's long. I'm going to show you a little bit from chapter 11 of book 12. Over here, this is just him ranting. No one interrupting him, nothing. You can't really see it well because I'm using photo booth right now, but it begins, oh my god, this is heavy. It begins right here, okay? I turn the page. These 2 entire pages are just him yapping. And then you continue to the next page, and he's yapping, and he's yapping, and he's yapping. And you know what stops him? A coughing fit. To which his buddies, he's hanging out, the context of this scene is that he's hanging out with Jolie and Bossuet before Lamarck's funeral and everything, and they're eating together. And they interrupt him, basically, after he starts coughing. And they're like, hey, have you heard about the gossip having to do with Marius? And then he starts going off about Marius until he drinks himself into not being able to talk anymore. I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but I feel like I need to read you a little portion of it so that you can really understand what it's like reading this character in canon. Here we go. Let's see. I suspect that God is not rich. The appearance exists, it is true, but I feel that he is hard up. He gives a revolution as a tradesman whose money box is empty gives a ball. God must not be judged from appearances. Beneath the gilding of heaven, I perceive a poverty-stricken universe. Creation is bankrupt. That is why I am discontented. Here it is, the 4th of June. It is almost night. Ever since this morning, I have been waiting for daylight to come. It has not come, and I bet that it won't come all day. This is the inexactness of an ill-paid clerk. Yes, everything is badly arranged. Nothing fits anything else. This old world is all warped. I take my stand on the opposition. Everything goes awry. The universe is a tease. It's like children. Those who want them have none, and those who don't want them have them. Total, I am vexed. And he just keeps going. Like, brother. As for his physical appearance, he is described as being incredibly ugly. Unnaturally ugly, frightfully ugly, inordinately homely, depending on the translation. Hold on to this tidbit of information because I'm going to bring this up later when I talk about how people draw Grantaire. Grantaire kind of stands as an oppositional force within the group, venturing more towards nihilism as opposed to the utopianism that the rest of the group leans towards. And I don't mean that he actively opposes them in any way, but if you deep it, being nihilistic is, in a way, being oppositional to Enjolras and what he represents. But what I'm saying here is that Grantaire doesn't, fight them. Marius, I think, is similarly on the margins of the group, but in more of, an orbit of friendship with the group, whereas Grantaire is more firmly inside of the group. Perhaps because he tends to go to more meetings, which Marius isn't all that keen on. What I'm saying is that, unlike Marius, Grantaire is a core member of Les Amis de la Bessée, despite his skepticism. The Amis see him as a friend and tolerate him because of his good humor, while the main reason he attends the meetings, blatantly stated in the book, this is not shipping brain rot, this is quite literally what it's like in the book, is because he's fascinated by Enjolras. In fact, over half of his character introduction is dedicated to his feelings towards Enjolras. EXR refers to the ship name for Enjolras and Grantaire. Grantaire's nickname being R, which is a pun on his name, which sounds like capital R in French, and E referring to Enjolras. Alternatively, the term Enjolras is used. Grantaire is Enjolras' foil. Where Enjolras is described at length as being beautiful, Grantaire is described as being ugly. Where Enjolras is described as being obsessed with revolutionary ideals, Grantaire self-describes as believing nothing. It is Enjolras that draws Grantaire to Les Amis, and his veneration and interest in Enjolras keeps him there. Hugo, in describing Grantaire, makes it clear that Grantaire's purpose within the novel is to be attached to Enjolras. These two are compared to Orestes and Pylades, Achilles and Patroclus, Alexander and Hephaestion, and several other male couples in Greek history and mythology. It's stated that Grantaire is one of those men of history who is destined to come after the name of his companion, being Pylades, Patroclus, and Hephaestion in all of these comparisons. In one translation, Hugo writes, "There are men who seem to be born to be the reverse, the obverse, the wrong side. They only exist on condition that they are backed up with another man. Their name is a sequel, and is only written preceded by the conjunction and their existence is not their own. It is the other side of an existence which is not theirs. Grantaire was one of these men." This isn't to say that Enjolras reciprocates Grantaire's veneration. This is a point of contention and depends on how you read Enjolras as a character. Enjolras treats Grantaire with scorn throughout the events of the book and seems repeatedly offended and exhausted by Grantaire's lack of belief system as well as Grantaire's general antics. Repeatedly, Enjolras is described using references and metaphors that make it clear that he rejects romantic love, and that it essentially is a waste of time in his mind. That being said, it doesn't necessarily say that he's incapable of experiencing these things, but rather that his focus is purposely elsewhere. And that's interpreted in a lot of different ways, but it does very specifically say that he's not interested in women. I'm a big fan of a bit of meta written by Tumblr user Angolupin, which is a really concise description of Enjolras' relationship, or lack thereof, with individuality, personal love, and the nitty-grittiness of humanity, which is represented by Grantaire in this interpretation, versus his single-minded focus on an ideal version of humanity and how the culmination of his character arc must conclude with him accepting Grantaire and accepting humanity as it is instead of relying on kind of an idealized version of humanity, you know? That being said, Grantaire's not the only character who, for lack of a better word, corrects Enjolras' approach to being more human. Combeferre also fills this role, albeit in a different way. But there are also ways to interpret metaphors Hugo uses and Enjolras' behavior in a way that confirms that he too held love for Grantaire, or for all of Les Amis, really. This is another small digression, but I really love Enjolras, and I want to defend him for a moment, because sometimes when you focus on Grantaire, you can kind of fall into this trap of seeing Enjolras as simply the dude who continuously rejects Grantaire until the very last moment. I see this happen a lot. Enjolras, Mr. Charming young man capable of being terrible, is a very loving character. It's just that we see his capacity for being terrible several times within the story, which makes sense in the circumstances. He cares a lot. Too much, even to the detriment of his own well-being. In the Barrière du Mans scene, it literally involves him walking around thinking about how amazing and cool all of his friends are at his jobs, but this is often ignored in favor of focusing in on the part where he's mad at Grantaire. He fantasizes that he and his friends are going to save the world. He's insane about them. An infinitely funnier way to interpret this would be to say that Enjolras is a little bit in love with all of his friends, which, like, hell yeah. Anyways, with this in mind, Grantaire is described as an unaccepted Pylades, a Pylades who isn't fully embraced by his Orestes. Their stories wrap up together in Orestes Fasting and Pylades Drunk, the chapter in which Enjolras and Grantaire die together. Grantaire spends most of the June Rebellion unconscious due to overdrinking, and wakes up just when Enjolras is about to be executed by firing squad. In his final moments, Grantaire walks in front of the firing squad, announces that he too is part of the rebellion, before asking for Enjolras' permission to die with him. They hold hands and are killed together, smiling.
À la volonté du peuple et à la santé du progrès, remplis ton cœur.
EXR are by far the most popular ship in this fandom today. I will pause here before I discuss how the modern fandom interacts with this ship, because first we have to discuss the 2012 film adaptation that really kindled interest in this ship. And to understand the 2012 movie, we first need to briefly discuss the history of Les Miserables adaptations, and also I desperately want to talk about these, so we're gonna have to do this. Les Mis has been adapted to film and television again and again, with varying degrees of success, because condensing a 1,000 plus page book into a coherent piece of media is an insane undertaking. Trying to figure out how many Les Mis adaptations there are is beyond my ability. There's just so many of them. Les Mis film adaptations have been released since 1897. The first adaptation, if you want to call it that, came from the Lumiere brothers in the form of a short film showing an actor quickly changing costumes. Since then, there have been a myriad of adaptations in film, television, radio, games, and God knows whatever type of media you can think of. There are big budget adaptations, low budget adaptations, adaptations that made no waves and we don't even know if they exist anymore, adaptations that are actively being restored today, things that are based on the story but not necessarily faithful adaptations. We've got it all. Film and TV adaptations all struggle to fully adapt the contents of the book and often focus too heavily on certain plot lines while cutting out other plot lines. There's this sort of pitfall that adaptations can fall into where the story becomes solely about Jean Valjean, which just simply isn't what Les Miserables is about. Often, many significant characters get cut completely, or several characters kind of get combined into one, making character arcs less satisfying than they are in the novel. Mysteriously, some adaptations choose to add random subplots, such as the 2000 French miniseries, which seems counterproductive when you already have too much on your plate to adapt. Some films try to remedy this by being extremely long, such as the 6.5-hour 1925 silent film, which was recently restored and uploaded online for free viewing. I note this because for years it was impossible to watch, but has since been restored and made available as of 2014. Some other notable adaptations that I think could be of interest include Shoujo Cosette, a 52-episode anime adaptation released in 2007 that is actually very well received by the fandom, and follows the footsteps of several manga and anime adaptation attempts done in decades prior. I was looking on YouTube for clips of this, anime for easy downloading, but it looks like everything got copyright struck a while back, and all that's left are a bunch of AMVs from 2008, which rock, and I spent 20 minutes watching them. But I did also find this animated show from 1992, which has some absolutely banger animation. Here's a taste.
Père, vous n'auriez pas dû venir.
Grand-père, que faites-vous là?
Et nous sommes venus pour vous sauver.
Bougre d'imbécile! Ne me dis pas que ces portefaix sont tes amis!
Lâchez ces deux hommes immédiatement. Ce sont de bons républicains.
Moi, République, pas du tout! Je soutiens le roi!
There are also several Indian film productions released in the Tamil, Telugu, and Hindi languages between 1950 and 1972 that use the overall story of Les Miserables, but adapt the setting into different regions of India. They look really interesting, and I can't find them with English subtitles, so if anyone has that, please let me know.
నా తల్లి నీ వెంటలోన రతనాల బొమ్మగా ఎదిగావు నా తల్లి నీ వెంటలోన
The 1958 French film, as far as I'm aware from my personal watching history, is one of the only versions to semi-accurately portray the firing squad scene that completes Enjolras and Grantair's character arcs. A huge feat considering Grantaire is usually deleted from the story entirely. It's also nearly 4 hours long, which I think helps. Another interesting adaptation is Arm Joe.
Arme Joe! Valjean! Enjolras! Bonbon! Éponine! Javert! Thénardier! Le policier! Cosette! Jugement! Robochon!
A 1998 2D fighter game produced by Takase. Okay, keep up, keep up. The game is free to play abandonware and uses mechanics found in Street Fighter 2 with characters from Les Miserables. You can play as Jean Valjean, Javert, Thénardier, Enjolras, Cosette, the police, and Marius, who was added in the 2006 patch. Takase also included 3 OCs, Robot Jean Valjean, the personification of Judgment itself, and Ponpon, who is actually a real character from Hugo's Les Miserables. He died on the barricade, okay? Let's put some respect on Ponpon's name. He threw the first brick at Rue Saint-Denis. This isn't even the only Les Mis game. There's actually some pretty janky point-and-click games on Steam that are quite recent and questionable at best. There's one that hasn't even been released yet as of the time that I was researching the Steam games. In terms of which adaptations I think are most book authentic, I think the 1934 production directed by Raymond Bernard is known for being the best at this. But also the film is literally 5 hours long, so watching it is a bit of an undertaking, but I promise it's worth it. This is not to be confused with the 1935 attempt, which is an abysmal attempt.
You did it. Your very presence killed her. So, Cosette, you'll go to an institution, eh? It's the law, is it? But there's an old law. Older than yours.
Sometimes adaptations are just, I don't know. They go off the rails a little bit, like the 2014 telenovela Los Miserables. Like, this one goes so off the walls that I can't even really consider it a bad adaptation because it doesn't even really attempt to be an adaptation. Some adaptations make rather weird choices when it comes to interpreting the story, such as the 1952 and 2000 adaptations, which both decide that Jean Valjean wants Cosette carnally instead of like a normal interpretation of the story, which involves him loving her like a dedicated father. It's like, what are we even doing here?
She's a woman. A beautiful and desirable one, as you well realize.
What do you mean, monsieur?
I mean that whether you know it or not, you're in love with her, and you want her for yourself.
The 1952 version also inexplicably invents a new character who is essentially Jean Valjean's boyfriend. Like, they fully live together and co-parent Cosette. Fascinating stuff. I hold dearly to me the 2018 miniseries, which I know is questionable to its core in regards to how Davies intended for Javert specifically to be perceived, and Javert's characterization is a little bit crazy, but I personally love to watch it by pushing Davies' intentions away and enjoying some brain-off sexual tension, and I think that David Oyelowo's performance is so compelling. Just one of the best to ever do it. There's a number of books based on Les Mis, such as The Court of Miracles by Kester Grant, which specifically follows Eponine and Laura Kapalkian's Cosette, which is famous in my brain for introducing the phrase, "This is a nipple," to my permanent lexicon. Anyways, there's something huge I'm avoiding here. A very significant and important adaptation I've breezed over in favor of telling you about Armjo. Don't worry. It's time to talk about her.
Grantaire, put that bottle down. Do we have the guns we need? Give me brandy on my breath, and I'll breathe them all to death.
The musical in its current form is a sung-through musical with music by Claude-Michel Schoenberg, lyrics by Alain Boublil, and Jean-Marc Natel. The French musical concept album was released in 1980, and the first stage adaptation occurred in September of the same year, with much of the same cast as the concept album. This is an aside, but the original concept album has a lot of bangers that didn't make it into the current musical.
Voilà, le soir qui tombe, et la trêve de rêve. Ils vont venir en nombre, l'attaque est pour cette nuit. C'est l'autre jour comme ça par hasard que j'ai retrouvé sa trace.
Also features disco music every single time Enjolras sings.
Lamarck est mort.
This was done because Enjolras is meant to represent the future and what was futuristic in 1980 France. Disco music, obviously. Hence, Disco Enjolras. Every time I think about it, I imagine, like, the 2012 movie playing Skrillex every time Enjolras is on screen.
Yes! Oh my god!
Musical, unlike many of the film and television adaptations, dwells quite heavily on the action of the 1832 June Rebellion. Like in the novel, the rebellion is kind of the climax of the production, with the action of the barricades featuring heavily in the productions itself and in promotional materials. I find that people who are aware of the musical associate Les Miserables with revolution in a way that people who have only experienced a film or television adaptation would more associate the story with Jean Valjean's martyrdom complex. As such, Les Amis de la Bassée feature pretty heavily in the musical and have entire songs, which is like, I'm not sure how to describe this, but it's really funny to see when a lot of film adaptations keep them all nameless or kind of breeze by that portion of the story. Meanwhile, the musical is being advertised as the Enjolras show. I don't have sources for this, I'm just telling you how I perceive it. The musical's English language adaptation began development in 1983 after producer Cameron Mackintosh was given the French concept album by director Peter Farago, who requested an English adaptation. Mackintosh teamed with the Royal Shakespeare Company to adapt the show to British audiences and premiered the show in London in October of 1985. Since then, it's become extremely popular, having been performed worldwide, Broadway, tours, etc. It is a phenomenon that has introduced so many people to the story of Les Miserables who might not have otherwise known the story. Particularly, the musical adaptation introduced and continues to introduce a certain population to Les Mis who might not otherwise be interested in the story. Theater kids. Class, what do we know about theater kids? Gay, horny, repressed, possibly depressed, dedicated to their craft, hyperfixative. I am allowed to say this. My credentials are that I am a homosexual who did theater tech in high school and created choreography for the theater club. Just keep in mind the nature of theater kids when I talk about the later modern fandom explosion. This is a population that is important to the rapid changes of how we interact with Les Miserables and who interacts with Les Miserables. The average Les Mis consumer of 2005 is different from the Les Mis consumer of 1950 because now we have this secondary cultural landmark that is, in a way, the same story, but also not. It invites different forms of engagement with the material than simply cracking open the book or even seeing the story played out on screen in a more traditional sense. The popularity of the musical means that when we read the book, we're often mentally putting it in conversation or associating it with the musical. And because they're so heavily associated with each other in ways that the book and other adaptations are not. When I tell people I like Les Miserables, many of them mentally jump to thinking I'm talking about the musical, despite the fact that I am an honest-to-God librarian, so one could and probably should assume that I'm talking about the book. The musical, for example, not the book, influenced the creation of Armjo, technically.
Armjo!
And that's the best adaptation we've ever gotten, obviously. Armjo aside, the musical has the honor of being an adaptation that spawned its own really significant adaptation. The 2012 Les Miserables movie.
And I'm Javert! You know what that means?
Means I'm free.
No.
From Wikipedia. Les Miserables is a 2012 epic period musical film directed by Tom Hooper from a screenplay by William Nicholson, Alain Boublil, Claude-Michel Schoenberg, and Herbert Kretzmer, and is based on the stage musical of the same name by Schoenberg, Boublil, and Jean-Marc Nartel, which is in turn based on the 1862 novel Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. This is the first and only film adaptation that is based on the musical, not on the novel. After being stuck in production hell for approximately 10 years, filming began in 2011, and the film was released in December 25th of 2012 to great success. It grossed $442.8 million worldwide against a production budget of $61 million during its original theatrical run. The film was nominated for a ton of awards, and the National Board of Review and the American Film Institute named Les Miserables as one of the top 10 films of 2012. Since its release, it has been considered one of the best musical films of the 21st century. The release of this film adaptation is kind of a jumping off point for a major and rapid rise of the Les Miserables fandom, both which existed before 2012 and continues to this day, but exploded in popularity on popular social media websites like Tumblr in the 2012 to 2016 era. Once again, hold on to this thought because I will dwell on this more later. I want you to particularly hold on to the thought of this being 2013 Tumblr and this being an adaptation of a musical, which focuses more heavily on the revolutionary students than other adaptations of Les Mis does. That being said, when I say there's more focus on these characters, I don't mean to say that they're as focused on in the film in a hugely significant way. For example, I found a supercut of the movie that is solely focused on Enjolras, who is the leader of this group and is shown the most out of all of them. The video shows every moment he sings, every time he's on screen, even like vaguely in the background of the shot. The video is 8 minutes long. The 2012 movie is 2 hours and 38 fucking minutes long. There's 2 hours and 30 minutes. He's not there. 8 minutes on the screen. Would you be able to tell that he only has 8 minutes of screen time based on interactions with the Les Mis fandom? But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because we're not here for any of the other actors of this movie. We are here for George Blagden. George Blagden was born December 28th, 1989, and is a London-based film, television, and stage actor. According to an archived About page, George trained as an actor in London at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, and, quoting exactly, at Guildhall, George explored the works of writers such as Chekhov, Shakespeare, Stevens, and Hare, and also performed in Restoration comedy and musical theater. He started singing at age 13 and performed in a number of choirs in venues such as King College, Cambridge, and St. Paul's Cathedral. He was also the lead singer of a rock band for 3 years and founded a songwriting masterclass which produced songs that were available on iTunes. George went on to produce his first album, Dimensional, and has enjoyed singing and songwriting ever since. Side note, if anyone has Dimensional, can you send it to me? I literally can't find it. George completed his training at Guildhall School of Music and Drama in June of 2011 and began filming The Philosophers, and later in November, he then worked on Wrath of the Titans. He's done a lot of interesting work since Les Miserables, such as the West End productions, and starring in several television shows such as Vikings and Versailles. He's also narrated a lot of audiobooks, including The Odyssey, which I only bring up because I feel like it's almost hilariously meta for Blagden to narrate The Odyssey, considering he's so well known for Grantaire. And if you don't know what the hell I'm talking about, don't worry, kitten. George, as I've mentioned many times, played Grantaire in the 2012 movie, and to be honest, he acted his ass off. Acted it right off. Grantaire is a pretty minor character in all adaptations, but does have some parts in the musical, both in the background of Les Amis scenes, with some lines mainly in red and black, which features Grantaire's kind of sarcastic, shit-stirring side, and Drink With Me, which expresses the more melancholic side of the character. Despite being a minor role, Blagden really makes an impact, even despite the fact that his portion of the song Drink With Me was cut from the final version of the movie. Hold on to this thought. More on that later. George Blagden, after the release of the 2012 movie, became known in this newly exploding Les Mis fandom for his particular interpretation of Grantaire, and also his ongoing interactions with the fandom. I know I'm jumping around the timeline a little bit here, and I haven't even talked about the fandom yet. I'm getting to it, I promise. But I think it's pertinent to talk a little bit about George Blagden's additional contributions to the Les Mis fandom outside of his actual movie role. I personally think there are 4 significant fandom contributions that occurred between 2013 and 2016 that really impacted the fandom and also how people perceive George Blagden today in the fandom, as well as majorly impacting how the fandom perceived the character of Grantaire himself.
Some whine and say, what's going on?
On August 31st, 2013, George Blagden posted a video titled ? On his YouTube page. The video is a cover of Death Cab for Cutie's I Will Follow You Into the Dark, which Blagden sings while playing an acoustic guitar. The video is notable because the lyrics of the chorus are changed to reflect Grantaire's thoughts towards Enjolras, making the song essentially a continuation of his Grantaire role.
In revolutionary school, as vicious as muse and rule, I got my feelings bruised by the leader in red, and I propped the bar as he told me, you're good for nothing, fool. And I heard every word that he said. So if heaven and hell decide that they both are satisfied, illuminate the nose on their vacancy signs. If there's no one beside you when your soul embarks, I will follow you into the dark.
Obviously, these are not the original song lyrics, and the changed lyrics make very specific references to the relationship between Grantaire and Enjolras, literally naming Grantaire, referencing the Café Musain, etc., as well as the song as a whole kind of reflecting the end of Grantaire's character arc, which is of course him choosing and also asking to die by Enjolras' side. This, by the way, was dropped completely out of the blue. No warning, raw.
I am a cock.
Number 2 is an interview Blagden did with Stage Door Dish in 2013. Unfortunately, Stage Door Dish is defunct and the website's gone, so I had to claw interview information out of another source, which is to say I'm getting this now secondhand from CBR posting an article about the interview. In this interview, Blagden states, having read the book, there's obviously a lot of subtextual content about the dynamic between Enjolras and Grantaire. In the interview, Blagden also explained that he didn't tell his co-star Aaron Tveit, I actually don't know if I'm saying his name properly, I'm sorry. Aaron played Enjolras, and he also didn't tell director Tom Hooper about his interpretation of Grantaire. He stated, I remember thinking of talking to Aaron about the subject as we started filming, and as I was about to talk to him, he was suddenly interrupted by someone else, and then suddenly I understood. That was the perfect example of what the dynamic between us should be. And then I realized actually not talking to Aaron about it at all was the perfect way to create that subtextual thing between Grantaire and Enjolras. And actually, I didn't talk to anyone about it, not even Tom. I just kept it a secret and thought that if people can read into it, great. And if people don't notice it, that's also fine, because it's not the main focus of the student plot.
I am aghast.
Dr. Amelia Roberts, who received their PhD in English from the University of Sussex, wrote their PhD thesis on same-sex desire and intimacy in Victor Hugo's Les Miserables and its adaptations, including fan work. This entire thing is available to read as of 2023, and I highly, highly, highly recommend checking it out. It's incredibly done and a very fascinating read. During their dissertation work, they conducted an interview with George Blagden via email. On October 19th, 2015, they posted this interview to their Tumblr blog, which was Tumblr user by juxtaposition. This interview hit the streets of the fandom like nothing else. How do you view Enjolras and Grantair's relationship? Ambiguous. This is why it is one of the most interesting and complex relationships in the book. It is purposely left to the reader to interpret in as much or as little as they want to. 2. How do you think their dynamic changes from the novel to the musical to the 2012 film? I think when they decided to create a musical out of the book, a lot of the subtler character elements from the book were lost. Naturally, you have to try and pick and choose what are the most important parts of the book that you want to try and squeeze into a musical. And the musical is still known for being a very long one. There just isn't time to delve into the characters in as much depth as Hugo could in his writing. When it came to the film adaptation, interestingly, it was different to the musical, even though it was supposed to be a direct adaptation of the stage show. Tom Hooper had the luxury of being able to shoot certain sequences that weren't found in the musical. Unfortunately, this led to the first serious edit, which he proposed to be released in cinemas with a running time of over 5 hours. Even I wouldn't be able to sit through a film that long. So he edited the film down hugely for the cinema goer. And some parts of the musical stage show were actually lost in that cutting process, such as Grantair's Full Drink With Me song. So it was an interesting result because it gained some important elements about the relationship and lost others. 3. Can you remember how the formation of your interpretation of Grantaire progressed and developed? How far were you influenced by the novel and how much by other things? It developed a lot. I think I realized very quickly that there was just too much information in the book about the relationship to try and convey in what ends up being an extremely condensed and succinct plot through the student segment of the film. So although that was all very interesting to know about, it was very challenging trying to communicate that in a scene to the audience or camera, and so I developed a natural editing procedure myself. I just started focusing on the most important things about them, and a lot of that did come from the novel. Aaron was also a huge influence because how he played Enjolras was going to very much dictate how I would need to react off of him. 4. Did you look at the original French at all before or during filming, and did any of the differences between the original French and any English translations you looked at influence your interpretation at all? I'm afraid I didn't. I thought with only a very limited time between when I was cast and when I went into rehearsals that the brick would be enough for me. But it's very interesting that you imply that there's a difference in the translation of it. How big is the difference? Do we need to go back and refilm the whole thing? 5. You said in an interview with Stage Door Dish that you never discussed the subtext in EXR's relationship with Aaron or Tom, which I thought was a really interesting and effective way of creating it. Do you think they were aware of the subtext, and if so, did you notice it affecting their acting or directing choices at all? And what aspects of your character were discussed with Tom, Aaron, or any of your other fellow actors? I don't think they were aware of it, to be honest. And honestly, not a lot about Grantaire was discussed with anyone, and I liked that. What happens on a film the scale of this one is that there are so many logistical nightmares going on set at any one time that with parts as small as Grantaire and the other students, often the direction was simply about hitting marks and making sure you're looking in the right direction. And that's not a sign of poor directing or anything like that. In fact, a director like Tom will cast people in a film that he knows will be able to get on with the acting side of things without much care and attention, which leads him to work how he's going to choreograph a 7-minute battle sequence on a 50-foot barricade around them whilst they're doing their own interesting solo line. So honestly, I did most of it on my own, and to be honest, I'm surprised that a lot of people picked up on things that I thought I was hiding quite well. 6. How did the subtext influence your performance? In particular, is there anything you can remember doing that was directly influenced by it? It influenced it hugely. Actors are always the most exciting to watch when there's a lot going on in their heads. I know that sounds quite simple, but it's amazing how much of a difference it makes. So I played a very simple game with myself. I would have a little game going on in my head that involved being constantly aware of wherever Aaron was on set at all times, only during takes during the filming. A simple little trick, but it meant that whenever the camera was rolling, I would always have part of my mind focused on that. Even if I was doing something miles away from where he was and had my attention focused on doing something else, I would always try to work out where he was, which I was hoping at the time would read on screen, and I hope it did. 7. Similarly, did anyone notice the subtext during or after filming in the brick or in the performance of the film and bring it up with you? Like I said, a lot of people have messaged me on Twitter or sent emails or letters confirming that they saw a lot of what I was trying to convey, which is nice because I guess it means it worked, but no one on the film, I think, had a slightest inkling. I'm skipping number 8. Number 9. You have and often continue to play a really active role in the Les Mis fandom, from sharing fan art on Twitter to posting videos like your cover of I Will Follow You Into the Dark with the lyrics rewritten to refer to EXR. Could you talk a little bit about your participation, your thoughts behind your participation, and about the fandom in general? It seems very rare for an actor to take such a caring and thoughtful approach in his respect, and it would be really interesting to hear where you're coming from and your involvement in the fandom, and anything you've noticed about the fandom in general. Well, I never knew it existed, not even during the filming. It was only when the film came out that I realized what a huge worldwide impact Les Miserables has. And then, though people involving me or people spamming me with the fandom, I found that there was a lot of love for these two characters. I would say I really think my job is about connecting with people. And I have been told the way I played Grantaire connected with a lot of people. So continuing that theme, I thought it was only fair to engage with the fandom in that way, and yeah, I guess like you say, participate. And I do love connecting with people, which is maybe why I have done things like the I Will Follow You Into the Dark cover. But I'm a believer of moving on from things as well, and letting others get involved, so I'm not sure I will be participating much more. But who knows? 10. It's really remarkable that two characters with relatively tiny parts in a novel that isn't widely studied in English have catalyzed such a massive response and clearly spoken to so many people. Why do you think this is the case? I think it is because they represent something that is very real and very timeless. The ambiguous relationship that we all have with someone in our lives because we don't really know what they are to us, and we just know that they mean a lot to us. I think it's something that a lot of people relate to in many ways, not just the homosexual connotations or the unrequited love, but lots of other layers that people find in their relationship that they can relate to personally. It's very powerful, and I think that's why we read books, watch films, listen to music. We engage with art because it affects us in some way. 11. What do you think now, looking back on your role as Grantaire in the light of the response it received? And has the fandom developed your thoughts on anything or any part of how you portrayed Grantaire since the film was released? I think I'm just happy that I got to be part of that amazing story. Playing Grantaire was a privilege. And I'm just happy that some people thought I did it well. But there will be others who thought I didn't. And that's the beauty of it, like my response to question 10. 12. Do you have any other thoughts about any of this to add? Thank you very much for picking my brains about it. It has been a pleasure to think back to the work I did in 2012 on this fictional relationship and how much it made me realize I love doing what I do.
It is better than an opera.
George Blagden followed up his reprisal of this role on the evening of June 5th, 2016. This date is notable because June 5th is Barricade Day, aka the actual real anniversary of the June Rebellion that the Les Miserables fandom celebrates as a fandom anniversary of sorts, although this has been a controversial practice in the past. Anyways, on June 5th, 2016, George Blagden tweets a link to a Vimeo video and states that the password is the name of the cafe. Upon clicking the link, users were prompted to enter the password, which was Muzen, the name of the cafe where the students organized. The video consisted of George Blagden walking on the exact location of the barricade at night while singing his cut verse in Drink With Me, which did not make it to the final film, and as you might remember, he mentioned specifically in that 2015 interview with Dr. Roberts. The video has since been taken down from Vimeo, but still exists on YouTube.
Drink with me, 2 days gone by, can it be you fear to die? Will the world remember you when you fall? Can it be your death means nothing at all? Is your life just one more lie?
Remember how earlier I said that his verse was cut from the song in the final version of the movie? Well, this verse was huge in the fandom, as around the time George Blagden's interpretation of Grantaire had become a huge deal as well. It was probably one of the most discussed cut moments of the film.
Just one more lie.
And I think it was primarily sought after because of the huge popularity of Blagden's Grantaire and the fact that in the musical, Grantaire's section in Drink With Me portrays one of the only moments in the musical where Enjolras' attention is drawn directly to Grantaire instead of Revolution. And in the process, it humanizes and complicates both characters on the stage. The song is often accompanied with the pair speaking intimately to each other while the rest of the cast sings, and this interaction is portrayed in a variety of ways depending on the performance and the actors and how they choose to interpret the relationship between Enjolras and Grantaire. The cut section of Drink With Me became a source of fascination within the fandom that was really locked in on EXR, and Blagden releasing a version of the verse was like an acknowledgement of this wide fandom interest in it. But let's reel back a little. I've kind of jumped the gun a little bit talking about George Blagden because we need to discuss the infamous Les Mis fandom in general, which existed before 2012 and increased in 2012.
À la volonté du peuple et à la santé du progrès, remplis ton...
The modern fandom, like all modern fandoms, heavily focuses on shipping, particularly of Enjolras and Grantaire, but to a lesser extent the other amis, Jean Valjean and Javert, and like once in a blue moon, maybe Marius and Cosette. To say that the ship Enjolras-Grantaire is popular would be an understatement. You see, as of 2024 end of the year, Enjolras-Grantaire was still in the top 100 written ships of all time on Archive of Our Own. Of all time. It was number 90 in 2024 still. Those are big leagues. We're talking the same leagues as fucking Destiel, Take Hook, Wang Xian. That's fucking crazy. And this change happened rapidly. Like, there's a really obvious uptick that you can track following the release of the 2012 movie, but also a small uptick in 2010 as well. A comment made on the Fail Fandom Anon on Dreamwidth by an anonymous user in 2018 states, I think it's easy to forget that Les Mis fandom really wasn't Slash heavy until maybe the 25th anniversary concert played up E/R. Before that point, Valvert may have outnumbered actual E/R, and Valvert was also a fairly rare pair. There was a lot of pre-Slash and a lot more romantic friendship on the Amis side. Any Slash was pretty dripping with angst and shame. This is in reference to the 25th anniversary concert of the musical.
One more day before the storm. I follow where she goes. At the barricades of freedom. Shall I join my brothers there? When our ranks begin to fall. Do I stay and do I dare? Will you take your place with me?
In this concert, Grantaire is played by Hadley Fraser and Enjolras is played by Ramin Karimloo. Their performances in this concert are famous, significant, fandom cultural heritage royalty for a reason. Arguably, Hadley is one of the best Grantaires to ever do it, given he was able to communicate a more complete image of Grantaire than other actors have even been given the opportunity to. In most instances, Grantaire actors in film and TV aren't given much space to work with. And as for musicals, well, it's hard to watch them. They're not usually streamed and available online for anyone to watch, especially not prior to 2010. Still today, people in the fandom pass around shitty, blurry performance recordings like Contraband. The anniversary concerts are the most widely accessible way to engage with the musical. They're big deals, gathering big names in the Les Mis musical space, and the performances are released on home video, something most musical performances are not. What I'm trying to say here is Hadley as Grantaire is probably the most widely shared, easily watchable musical Grantaire performance. The nature of the musical allows Grantaire to do more than, say, a film ever would allow, and Hadley's good at his fucking job. And then there's Ramin, who leans into the tenderness with his interactions with Grantaire, which is a bit different than other Enjolras performances. Enjolras performers have options when it comes to how they interact with Grantaire, and choosing to appear reciprocal is kind of a rare occurrence. Quite frankly, it boils down to how much time do you have to devote to playing up Les Mis interactions while also keeping the musical on track? How do you interpret Enjolras, and are you insane enough to Fougeot out on the stage? And here's the thing about the 25th anniversary concert. They are mostly unencumbered by the normal stage blocking of the musical. They're just standing in front of microphones, singing and acting their shit. The focus is very intensely on their facial expressions and how they interact with the people standing directly next to them. So the audience receives different information than they would if they were to, say, be sitting in the audience watching a normal performance of Les Mis. This is the micro-expression machine. And, like, the combination of Hadley and Ramin doing all of this on stage in front of Nick Jonas's Salad is insane to watch.
Can I live when we are parted? One day more.
Now imagine handing this performance over to young theater kids in approximately 2010, and then you hand them George Blagden 2 years later. Viewing the Les Mis tag on AO3 via the Wayback Machine shows a very stark rise both in the quantity of Les Mis fanfics, but also the drastic changes in the type of content that was being written. And I understand that AO3 is not necessarily a fantastic representation of older fanfiction quantities, as fanfiction used to primarily be hosted on other websites, including specific fan websites, many of which have been lost to the sands of time, which is why fandom archives such as AO3 are so important. I look at AO3 specifically because AO3's popularity and the rise of the Les Mis fandom are contemporary. The Wayback Machine snapshot from April 2012 of the Les Mis tag, which was before the release of the 2012 movie, shows very few works. These works represent a lot of different ships, and EXR is not the major player that it would become in just a few months. AO3's earliest backposted works are from approximately 2004 to 2010, and while, yes, they're for the most part focused on specific character drabbles or ships not commonly seen anymore, circa 2010, the year of the previously mentioned 25th anniversary concert, there is an uptick in EXR fanfiction, which I personally think is crazy. Like, when I first heard about it, I didn't actually believe the idea that Slash wasn't a big deal in the fandom until 2010, but now I kind of believe it.
It's Pride Month, 24601. You know what that means.
Ha! What?
Now, January 2013, right after the release of the film, like right after the release of the film since it came out December 25th of 2012, there is a definite increase already, and EXR is much more significantly represented. I apologize about any background noise, my cat is playing right now. The next capture, 1 year later, shows 9,400 fics, and EXR is prominent, inescapable in a way. By 2015, there's 12,000 works total, the majority of which feature EXR in some way. That leads to today, and it's hard to give you an exact number of fanfics because it's still climbing. Actually, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go on Archive of Our Own, Les Miserables. I'm about to figure this out right now. Because last time I checked, we're getting close to 24601, which... Okay. Today, I'm recording this July 17th of 2025, and we have 23,156 works. When I click on the characters tab on AO3, Enjolras has the most quantity of fic written about him at 14,033, followed quickly by Grantaire at 12,910. At the bottom of this list that they show me is Jean Valjean, the main fucking character, and he has 3,774 fics. Just to show you the kind of number discrepancies we're working on right now. My cat is pissed off that Jean Valjean is not being represented properly on AO3. I am so sorry, my son. For those who are curious, I checked out fanfiction.net as well. There are significantly fewer works posted there, and those that are hosted are a fair bit older. Of course, fanfiction.net is known for suffering through mass deletions, particularly of queer works, so I do not know if the numbers I see in 2025 are representative of a complete history. In fact, I sincerely doubt I have much access at all to Les Mis history on fanfiction.net. Regardless, shout out to whoever was on fanfiction.net posting Les Mis fanfiction in 2000. The latest works on fanfiction.net appear to be from 2020, unless if I messed up how to search for Les Mis on the website. I haven't been on fanfiction.net in a very long time. Older works on the website are often musical focused or are about wrapping up loose ends for side characters, but not EXR. On Wattpad, and before I say this, I will be honest, I've never used Wattpad before, so I have no idea if I searched properly, but a quick search turned up about 8,700 works. I primarily saw OC straight women paired up with various male characters from the book, which was a very scary experience for me as a person who hates straight people and is afraid of Y/N fanfiction. They're out there writing Eponine and Javert together. It was a very terrifying experience. So I ran a second search of fanfiction tagged Grantaire, and the results were damning insofar that the results became a lot gayer real quick. Shockingly, only about 300 results came up when I searched for Grantaire, which I suppose goes to show that the AO3/Tumblr communities are quite separate from whatever's going on Wattpad. Something that was very interesting to me about Wattpad are the painstakingly edited together cover images people make for their fan works. When searching for fan fiction that involves Grantaire, I asked a single question. How many covers have George Blagden on them or are like a George Blagden lookalike on them? Of the fan works that I saw that seemed to specifically be EXR, not fanfiction, those but the whole cast and tagged as Grantaire simply because he was there at some point, but EXR specific works, yes. A lot of the covers either involved edited photos of George Blagden or fan art that looked suspiciously like George Blagden. Believe me on the fan art part, because I refused to put fan art in the video. It'd make me feel like I was calling out specific artists, and that isn't my intention. But I feel like the photo edits are kind of fair game. But what about the non-fanfiction side of things? This is a little harder to quantify because there aren't really fandom archives of all the fan art or all the discussions about Les Mis across the internet. This is just unrealistic to figure out. However, I can try and piece some things together using my memory and whatever I could scrounge up. I did attempt to look on DeviantArt and saw only 4,000 results pop up, keeping in mind that I searched without an account. There was a lot of AI-generated stuff, like AI-generated Cosette, and then I searched Enjolras and I was greeted with 56 painstakingly drawn George Blagden clones. More on this later. So then I took a look at some LiveJournal communities in an attempt to get access to pre-2012 fandom activity. I primarily looked at the Les Mis and Misfic LiveJournal communities for this. The Les Mis LiveJournal goes back as early as July 2000 in a post where the user says that they have been lurking in the community for a while, but finally decided to post. Where are the other posts from before July 2000? I cannot find them. I didn't remember much about LiveJournal, but a quick search turned up that, if an account is deleted within a year, their comments are kind of subject to purge. So we're definitely missing a massive chunk of posts here. I clicked the archive calendar on the community somewhat randomly and found that most posts I could still encounter were focused on the musical, a few were posting fan fiction. What was up with the fandom in Enjolras and Eponine? And a small bit of meta. Posts peter out a bit near 2011 and then pick up again in 2013. Again, I seem to have access to very few remaining posts, so I hesitate to really try and analyze this community considering the majority of it seems to have been lost. Les Mis was last active in August of 2015, allegedly, and the most recent posts were heavily focused on the 2012 movie, of course, specifically about EXR. I found one post that mentions a surge in the fandom, specifically on Tumblr, and an attempt to retain a fan community on LiveJournal and Dreamwidth. The Les Mis fic community has far fewer remaining posts. The last remaining posts are from 2013, and many of these posts are redirects to AO3 postings. The archive calendar shows the earliest remaining posts are from 2005, and I was shocked, I tell you, to find 2005 Angleterre fanfiction here. Like, nearly all of it was Angleterre, which I don't know is, like, starkly different from other fanfiction postings of the same time period on other websites. Looking through them made me wonder how much Angleterre fics were possibly purged on websites such as fanfiction.net due to their queer themes. I read some of these older pre-2012 EXR fanfiction both on LiveJournal and on AO3, and as I suspected, the general tones, content, and characterizations of Enjolras and Grantaire are very different than what we encounter in typical EXR fanworks post-2012. More on this later. One that I read, posted in 2006, advertises itself as a subversion of that old Grantaire comforts Enjolras in a moment of doubt fanon trope, which makes me desperately wish I had greater access to pre-2006 fanfiction, because this implies that there were EXR tropes that at that time were common enough to be subverted. Then, remembering the LiveJournal user who talked about retaining a community on Dreamwidth, I turned to Dreamwidth. The most recent Les Mis community on Dreamwidth was updated in 2022, but most posts are from 2014 and prior. There are actually multiple Les Mis communities on the website with different posts. I'm sorry, a 20-hour production you were filming? Why the fuck would you? A lot of the posts I can find in these communities, except for the Valverde community, were focused on like meta, history, etc. One community, La Musaine, focused on Les Amis, but only had one poster and like 3 post-ops. In the main community, there are, of course, a smattering of Angleterre fanfiction in 2013, but the community seemed, to me, looking out with my 2025 eyes, to be focused on other things.
We're all finished here in the makeup tent. I've got my wound, as you can see, and now I'm off to the barricade so I can get killed.
One fan community I desperately wish to explore, but can only sort of access through the Wayback Machine, is abc.thebarricade.net, which was a Les Miserables fan forum mostly focusing on the musical. The site went down in 2019 after the hosting service shut down. It was active until its shutdown in 2019 based on Wayback Machine captured data. The Wayback Machine has 50 captures of the website throughout its history, and something I found interesting was that the number of captures increased pretty significantly between 2013 and 2016. The earliest capture available was in August of 2011, so I can't access anything before that. But by August 2011, the forum was already quite active, but activity did increase after December 25th, 2012. I wish I could read the forum post, but only the forum post titles and like the format of the website was archived, so I have very little access here. As we can see, the fandom existed before the 2012 movie, but really increased in size after its release, a theme we see over and over again in retrospective posts about the fandom. I'm personally fascinated by a 2013 rant on Tumblr that seems specifically to address people making Enjolras fuck in fanworks, in which the author makes references to the fandom having changed as new people enter it, and that discussions regarding Enjolras have become too much or too extreme very suddenly. They state, "I'm sick and tired of this fandom. Many of my best friends are Les Mis fans. Tumblr is bursting with Les Mis fans I admire, both those who were there before the movie and who I've got to know during the past 7 months. I'm as big a fan as ever, but as a collective, as a fandom, we've become horrible. Insanely funny for that to be a 2013 post, by the way. I was also fascinated by The Birth of a Fandom, a personal insight on Les Miserables by Agnese, which is a listicle, timeline-like formatted 2019 recollection of how the 2013 era Les Miserables fandom functioned. This person came to the Les Miserables fandom specifically because Russell Crowe was cast as Javert, and I think that's batshit insane, but beautiful.
What?
The same author, Agnese, wrote a blog post love letter to the musical, and in it, they mention, "Please, if you are a fan of Les Mis because of Les Amis de la ABC, bear with me here. I love them too. I even like Marius sometimes. And I found them all absolutely amazing at Queen's Theatre. Yet I cannot help but focus on Jean Valjean and Javert, because these two characters are something else to me." I find this to be such a telling line because, yes, that is to say, interest in the wider story of Les Mis is something that is odd in the early 2010s era of the fandom. It oftentimes feels like being interested in the main characters is to be at odds with the whole of the fandom because Les Amis are so focused on. This is something that I think was an unexpected result of the 2012 movie. While previous iterations of the fandom did focus on side characters, book lovers seemed intent on writing fanworks and meta about characters like Petit Gervais, Conventionalist G, Favourite, etc. The rapid pivot that the fandom took after the 2012 movie was released was shocking. Gone were the days that one could go into the Les Mis fan community and expect to see Marius Cosette fanfiction next to a meta post about Catholicism in 1820s France, next to an appreciation post for someone who played Eponine in an obscure musical production in Central Ohio in 2002. Now, there were Amis to ship. There were George Blagdons to edit into melancholic little gift sets. There are photos of his buddy Aaron to drool over. Who the hell is Javert? Jean Valjean was that bread guy, right? Editing Taylor again. I'm not going to try and quantify Tumblr in the same way that I do these other websites. Because this whole video is kind of about Tumblr, and also, if you've never been on Tumblr before, trying to quantify Tumblr interactions, fandom, like posts, fandom interactions, direct messages, etc., is impossible. And Tumblr's not very good with searching. If I'm looking for posts specifically from 2013, it's gonna be a battle, for lack of a better word, to find that information. It's like trying to count grains of sand. It's just stupid and may result in you dying of exposure. That being said, the Tumblr fandom is still active. It's one of the more active websites I've seen. I've gone on a lot of different websites and typed in Les Mis community, blah, 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 blah. And Tumblr's kind of the only one I've found that has a consistent user base that is still posting about this. So that being said, when I'm talking about the development of fanon on Tumblr for Les Mis, I mention over and over again that I'm talking about the 2013 to 2016 era because I think this is where a lot of these tropes were formulated. Or rather, some of them existed beforehand, but they really got solidified in this time, and since then, people are just kind of reproducing it, questioning it to an extent, but reproducing it, and then things are kind of trailing off, if that makes any sense. So how does the fandom actually interact with Les Amis? I'm going to talk a little bit about fanon, which is to say tropes that are not part of the canon work, but are so widely accepted within a fandom that they are like a form of canon. And to do that, I need to first explain a huge trend in the Les Mis fandom, which might not be immediately obvious to someone who doesn't know about the fandom, but does know that Les Mis is set in the early 1800s. This is because it very distinctly impacted what fanon tropes would emerge in this era of the fandom. From fanlore. After the film adaptation brought in a large amount of new fans, modern AU fanworks became so common that they were considered the norm in certain parts of the fandom, particularly on Tumblr and AO3. The phrase canon era became widespread to differentiate between the two, with Les Miserables being the second most common fandom for the AO3 tag, just after the fandom that coined it. Stephen Bradley, in Les Miserables in the 21st Century, argues that the story of Les Miserables is ripe for appropriation by diverse audiences who have sought to define their identities at moments of challenge and change. Of course, not everything about Les Amis in the fandom is set in modern alternate universes. I'm just mentioning this because it's a huge component of how the fandom operated and continues to operate. On one hand, you have the canon era, the angst, the meta, the discussions of different references made in the book, the barricades of it all, etc., etc., etc.
I just died, man. Horrible.
There's genuine fear. Everyone died, we all got shot, and we threw a lot of bottles at people, and it went on quite a long time, but we're all still alive.
Excuse the pun, but I'm going out with a bang.
War, man. Battle.
On the other hand, you have these same characters being put into a whole mess of modern situations with wildly different stakes and explorations of modern issues. This requires the characters to be changed slightly to reflect modern times, as you can't just plunk an early 19th century French student revolutionary into, 2015 New York City without some things getting lost in the sauce. For this, you need fanon interpretations. In all fandoms, characters are subject to fanon interpretation. Whether or not these fanon interpretations are accurate to the canon are up to debate and are on a case-by-case basis. And in some instances, the fanon interpretations are a never-ending loop of reinterpretation. In the era of fandom that I'm discussing here, that is to say 2012 to 2016-ish, was a very particular era on Tumblr specifically. If you were on Tumblr in this time period, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just know that this is around the same time that the Lorax movie was released and the subsequent Onceler fandom grew in prominence. And if you don't know what the Onceler fandom is, I envy you so fucking much. I wish I have tears in my eyes over this. Holy fuck. Whew. Tumblr users of the... I'm traumatized from that. Tumblr users of the era were obsessed with shipping skinny attractive twinks with other skinny attractive twinks. They found the Onceler to be a skinny attractive twink. Without another skinny attractive twink to ship him with, they decided to ship him, not with the Lorax, but with himself. In different iterations and different forms, a never-ending cycle of fanon eating itself until fanworks resembled nothing like the canon. It was like, oh, character development, a character who changes its goals throughout the story as the situation changes? No. These are separate characters and they're going to fuck. Who's the Lorax? Side note, a bunch of people I followed on Tumblr got sucked into this fandom at this time, and it was so fucking scary to watch because you would just be scrolling. Here I am, I'm looking for pictures of George Blagden, and there's a bunch of people drawing the Lorax fucking himself. What? So this is a brief description of the type of culture we're dealing with here. Now imagine this same setting, the same unending urge to ship twinks with each other, and now imagine there's this shiny new musical movie, which is a section featuring a lot of attractive young men who are doomed by the narrative, and there's one particular actor in the group who's really dedicated to the whole idolizing and constantly watching another member of the group aspect of the character. And maybe the messier aspects of this character from the original book aren't portrayed on the screen because the actor truly only had enough screen time to portray the veneration aspect. I hate to have to say this, but I know sometimes people forget about nuance, and I want to preface my next section by saying that me being critical of fandom tropes does not mean I think they're bad or wrong. Being critical of fanon tropes does not mean I don't enjoy them, that I don't eat them up on occasion. The world is a nuanced place, and I'm allowed to question the consistent presence of modern United States high school AUs while also thinking that World Ain't Ready by Idiopathic Smile is one of the finest works of literature of the 2010s. Before I talk about fan art, I'm just going to tell you that I'm not going to show any fan art because I don't want to call out or even reference specific fan artists. I'm just going to be telling you what I have seen for the past 13 or so years, and you're just going to have to trust me on this. Hello again, this is Editing Taylor with another note. I should have mentioned this when I recorded this, and I literally cannot believe that I forgot about it while I was preparing my script and also recording the video. But we have an incredibly endearing sketch that Victor Hugo did of the Barrière du Mans scene where Grantaire is losing horrifically at dominoes. And this means we kind of have a canon image of him, even though technically speaking, you know, he doesn't have a description in the text. We have this outside piece of information from the author himself showing what he perceived Grantaire to be. And it looks like this. Now, he could technically be either guy here, but we can probably assume he's the really sad looking one, just given the context of the image. And also there's a caption attached to it. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but it makes some reference to a phrase about losing one's pants, which means he's losing really bad at the game. Anyways, that's my cocaine shoddy. I really love this image. I'm so endeared by this image. I really love it. God. I love him. Anyways, the points that I make here still stand completely because this is absolutely not how people draw him or describe him in different fan works, and the only times that I've seen fan art that even vaguely looks like this is when someone is purposely trying to remind people that this sketch even exists. Another thing that I failed to mention is that Grantaire is often depicted in fan art or in fan fiction, etc., as having facial hair, which is obviously in line with Hugo's intentions based on, you know, this rockin' ass mustache that he has. Except most of the time people give him like a little like jaw stubble instead of an amazing mustache, which is cowardly, first of all. Anyways, back to my original video where I briefly have a mental breakdown over Grantaire fan art. I'm so sorry. But fanon representations of Les Amis are varied and wide. For all of Les Miserables' characters, actually, fanon representations are varied and diverse. This is a book in which the canon doesn't really have specific face claims for the characters, but some characters do have some kind of vague physical description. Jean Valjean has blindingly white hair. Javert has a square jaw. Marius has impressive nostrils. It's been adapted hundreds of times over with different people and different art. This makes drawing fan art or describing the characters in fan art both difficult because you don't necessarily have exact descriptions to fall upon, but it's also freeing. The great thing about having a cast of characters with very little descriptions to them means that you can represent them however you want. You can project whatever you want. You can use them like your own personal dolls if you wish. You can put these characters in any situation. You can make these characters any race, any body type, any gender presentation, whatever you want. You can create your own representation and imagine yourself or the people around you in roles that these characters exist, either in a canon era or in modern AUs. Les Mis fan artists have long been drawing characters, particularly Les Amis and other characters attached to them, like Eponine and Cosette, in a wide variety of ways. I'm thinking about other popular fandoms of the time, like, I don't know, My Little Pony, and how there's such a wide variety of ways people personified those characters in fan art. Another example, but a less popular fandom, is Homestuck, which I hate to have to invoke in 2025, but in 2013 I was exiting the Homestuck fandom and entering Les Mis, and in that fandom, it was also very common for people to draw the character in a huge variety of ways. So for me, being in one and entering another fandom and seeing the same trends just made sense to me. but I do understand in some fandoms this just isn't really a common practice. Amelia Roberts brings this up in their dissertation that I mentioned earlier, which involved research into the Les Miserables fandom and a survey of fandom participants. One respondent is quoted, "Fan art and fic became steadily more diverse in terms of race and gender the further we got from the 2012 film, in a shift from 2012 white cis gay boys to characters of color and queer characters." And this is amazing, but representing Grantaire in art is particularly difficult. The ugliness can be, and is, a metaphor, as Hugo often does this to show characters are miserable in some way. Grantaire gets no physical descriptions outside of being very ugly, which is mostly there to contrast with Enjolras being beautiful. Yada yada yada, but then you have to consider that Hugo's description of beauty is the way it is. In the metaphor option, you are free to make Grantaire as beautiful as you wish, as long as you harp on the idea of ugliness equating to, like, depression in the book. But let's say we're taking this literally. We usually take Enjolras' beauty at face value, so why should we not take Grantaire's ugliness at face value? How do you draw or even imagine a character whose main canon description is being extremely ugly? You have essentially two options here. You can either draw the character using features that you personally consider to be ugly. This is an unfortunately revealing conundrum, because how you choose to represent this character reveals a lot about you, how you perceive others, and the specific internalized isms and phobias that you're grappling with, or not, I guess. The other option is to just draw an actor who has played that character. Fandom art of Grantaire, from what I have seen, has been really consistent in a way that other fanon interpretations of Les Mis aren't. Only Enjolras and Jean Valjean have the same level of consistency across the board, which makes sense because they both get fairly lengthy descriptions of their appearances. Of course, there are deviations. There are fan artists who choose to draw them in ways that aren't consistent with general fandom trends or even their canon descriptions, but overall you get kind of the same images over and over again. But what is this consistent representation for Grantaire who does not have that type of description? What attributes did the fandom land on collectively? A lot of people chose the actor-model route, relying heavily on George Blagden's portrayal of him. George's hairstyle, general face, even his build are kind of mainstays. This, again, is a pretty safe option. I want it known if you look up Grantaire on the Les Mis fandom wiki, you get a photograph of George Blagden. There are many popular Grantaire actors to choose from, but it is far more common to see a George Blagden clone than it is to see, say, a Hadley Fraser clone. But there's something additional about the kind of popular fandom image of Grantaire that has bugged me for years. Something that is different than George Blagden, but it is so consistently applied to Grantaire representations. And before I say this, I know a lot of fan art of Grantaire comes from good places. I know it comes from people who legitimately like the character, and they don't have bad intentions in their hearts, and maybe aren't necessarily thinking about the optics of what they're drawing or writing. And before I even tell you what optics I'm discussing, I feel the need to explain why it rubs me the wrong way. You see, how do you represent a character who is unfathomably ugly? A character who is the foil of another character. A character who's described as unfathomably beautiful. A beautiful character who is usually portrayed as being pale, blonde-haired, and blue-eyed. How do you draw that sad, ugly foil of that beautiful, pale, blonde, blue-eyed man? Oh my god. Because do you choose to make him brown-skinned? Do you make him an ethnically ambiguous brown man? Do you make him look like Oscar Isaac? Do you draw Dev Patel? I pray I don't have to explain how the optics of that are not good when drawing this character who venerates and worships another man. And you make the venerator brown and you make the veneratee white. And you had no reason to do that. Many fan artists do avoid this, but in my experience, the majority don't. And so for over 10 years, I've seen fan art that looks like Oscar Isaac or Dev Patel weeping over a teenage Bjorn Anderson labeled #Angleterre, and I don't know, the optics aren't good when you consider there's no canonical reason to do that, and these two come with the baggage of the ugly/beautiful dichotomy. I can't shut the fuck up. I'm sorry. Not to add another thing this section, but add another thing. I am not saying that I think we should be making Grantaire white all the time. I am saying that we need to be very mindful about how we are drawing or describing him when we are also depicting Enjolras as a blonde white man, given the context of their connection, their implications on the storyline, what they're meant to represent, etc. And I find the obsession with making Enjolras blonde kind of fascinating, because other characters are described with hair color, etc., and we don't force the same kind of fidelity to canon on them. For example, Cosette, who's not supposed to be blonde. How often do we see her as blonde? That's another can of worms entirely. I mean, for Christ's sake, Hugo implies super heavily that Javert is Romani, and how often does that appear in adaptations, fan art, fan fiction, etc.? Like, never? Which is a shame, because I think it's really important for understanding Javert as a character. This video is not about Javert. I can't talk about Javert right now. Hold on. What I'm saying is, this is not a fandom that is married to canon. So why are we so married to Enjolras being blonde? And I'm not opposed to Enjolras being blonde, but you know, I see a lot of stuff, you know, and you see this character who you know is meant to represent the personification of the future, and he's supposed to be very beautiful and everything. And I'm looking at a piece of fan art, and here he is. This is like tall, skinny, blonde white man. And then I look over and I see the character who is meant to represent more like humanity and stuff like that. And he's a black man, and I see that he's on his knees and he's like staring up at this blonde white man like in prayer and reverence, and I'm like, guys, this is fucking weird. This looks fucking weird. Oh my god. Anyways, I'm gonna talk about fanning Grantaire's other attributes. I'm going to try and explain them. When describing Grantaire's attraction to Enjolras in the book, Hugo writes, "A phenomenon often seen, a skeptic adhering to a believer, that is as simple as the law of complementary colors. What we lack attracts us." Enjolras is usually associated with the color red, and this is especially true in adaptations, where he is usually seen wearing a red waistcoat or jacket, and of course sings the song Red and Black in the musical. The musical in particular uses his kind of obnoxious and gaudy red vest to really single him out and make him stand out on stage with the rest of Les Amis. The complementary color to red is green. Therefore, Grantaire becomes associated with green. George Blagden's Grantaire costume follows through with this norm, having him in a green waistcoat that matches Enjolras' red one. And then, of course, fandom loves representing and associating colors with characters, so green and Grantaire become basically inseparable in a bunch of Les Mis fan works. I do think that the association with Grantaire and green is slightly more recent, maybe a post-2010 thing that was solidified in 2012. In the 2010 25th anniversary concert, Hadley Fraser wears a predominantly green outfit, and then almost immediately after, in 2012, George Blagden's Grantaire also wears an outfit with a big splash of green. In a 2008 LiveJournal post of someone considering dressing up as Enjolras and Grantaire for Halloween, they seem to struggle to figure out a color scheme for Grantaire, suggesting grays and browns. I found it interesting that none of the comments suggest green, and instead they suggest that the waistcoats could be any color that they wish. To me, this implies that in 2008, a mere 2 years before the 25th anniversary concert and 4 years before the 2012 movie and the George Blagden apocalypse, there wasn't yet this association between Grantaire and green. Grantaire lets bits of his background slip out, often in the process of making sex jokes or whatever rambling point he's trying to make. In one case, he says that he studied art under Antoine-Jean Gros. Here, I'm going to be referencing a Tumblr post by user Etanarcadia, which analyzes Grantaire's "I spend my time pilfering apples" comments. The post reads, "Grantaire can be an unreliable self-reporter, because he is so prone to exaggeration and rhetorical tricks to make his points, so we can't exactly take his statements at face value, nor expect that he intended us to. The rest of what we know of him, libertine ideals, considerable classical training, does fit with an artistic background, however." Keeping in mind that Antoine-Jean Gros was a real man Hugo was invoking here, a painter who drowned himself in 1835, was highly criticized in his time, and known to have been tired of his life. Many such cases. Invoking him here could have been more to give original readers of Les Mis, who may have known what Gros represented, a solid idea of the type of melancholy that Grantaire is supposed to be associated with. Also, Antoine-Jean Gros was known for painting Bonapartists, so this could have been a little politics joke, because Bonapartists are kind of a running sore spot for Les Amis. Being an artist is a huge aspect of Fan and Grantaire, in both canon-era works and modern AUs. Grantaire is often seen covered in paint, working on commissions as his main source of income, painting big, emotionally, classically inspired paintings of Enjolras, smelling of turpentine, being an art student, etc. I actually directly blame George Blagden for this one, like fully 100%. Do you remember the "I Will Follow You Into the Dark" cover that George Blagden posted on YouTube? Because that wreaked havoc on Grantaire interpretations. Do you know how many times I've seen fan art of Grantaire holding an acoustic guitar? Do you know how much modern AU fanfiction involves him strumming some chords and singing emotionally charged songs as Enjolras looks on emotionally? Do you know? And this is a character who has so many hobbies and interests already, so in being a musician isn't even... This is canonical, but used to a lesser extent in fan works, and in my experience is non-existent in some cases. It's used in fan works often as a bit of background information, much like how Grantaire uses this fact in canon. Occasionally it's used in fan fiction to explain why Grantaire is muscular, despite not eating properly and getting all of his calories through alcoholic beverages. Sometimes it's used in fan works as thirst trap material, or so that he can do some sort of fighting scene and not have his fighting skills come out of nowhere. So this makes no sense. I can't pinpoint an exact reason or moment that this became a popular fanon trope, but I can provide my theories. You see, adapting Les Amis to a modern setting in a way that shows them as a diverse group of leftists fighting for equality and not as like a circle jerk situation brings up a very big hurdle. There are no women. There are very few women who can reasonably be put in Les Amis in fan works for AU purposes. And usually the ones that are selected are Cosette, Musicetta, and Eponine, given that all three are young enough to be in the kind of the same sphere as the other characters, and all three have some sort of connection to them. Eponine has the added benefit of literally dying on the barricade, although she's there for different reasons than the Amis, so it isn't that huge of a long shot for her to be a member in modern AUs. But it works even better if Eponine has social connections to someone in Les Amis as a way to explain why she is there, despite not necessarily being a character who would hold passion for radicalism. Marius is an obvious option, but this lends itself to Eponine being his shadow in the group, and it's not great optics to have a woman in the group who no one talks to except for the dude that she may or may not have an unrequited crush on. Hence, the need to give her some sort of friendship or friendships that don't rely on her connection to Marius, and also gives creators the chance to have Eponine talk about Marius for all the angst purposes as needed. Add this to her fan and modern AU aesthetic and all of her chipped black nail polish glory, lining up with some of the fan and aesthetics of modern AU Grantaire, and Grantaire, who's already sort of the odd one out amongst les amis, and also a character who can be suitably gruff and angsty in a way that complements Eponine characterizations, he becomes a good option here. This also helps Grantaire to have social connections outside of the core les amis, giving creators a chance to have him discuss angst, Enjolras, and les amis problems with a slightly more neutral party than, say, Joly and Bossuet. For what it's worth, Grantaire having a connection to Gavroche, Eponine's brother, is sort of a musical-only detail, a role he sometimes shares with other members of les amis depending on the production. This is not canonical. It's still an intense stretch to say that Grantaire is friends with Eponine canonically because sometimes he's seen high-fiving her somewhat estranged brother in the musical. He's French. Often, the veneration of Enjolras thing kind of overrides Grantaire's insistence that he doesn't believe in anything. Many fanworks choose to have Grantaire actually believing in things, but opting to play devil's advocate, or using apathy as a way to mask his big feelings about everything going on around him, and childhood trauma. And the alternative is that instead of being, without beliefs, as he claims, you have a Grantaire whose belief systems line up pretty strongly with les amis, but he disagrees with methodology or has some oppositional views about the general populace's willingness to accept or enact change. I personally think this makes sense. In modern AUs, the stakes are quite frankly very different when you compare them to early 19th century France, and cynicism carries a little differently depending on what kind of politics you ascribe to les amis. So there is a lot you can do here. A true apathetic probably wouldn't have been at meetings where he could be arrested just for existing within the space, nor would a true apathetic today, for example, constantly be at political rallies or long-winded organization meetings, no matter how much he wants to smash the de facto organization leader. Though, not gonna lie, Canon Grantaire's kind of balls to the wall insane for this. Grantaire canonically doesn't spend his time at the Musen refuting political points or even really contributing to the actual conversations happening there. He spends his time drunkenly rambling with his friends as they half listen to him. When he brings up revolution, he says things like, "I don't think about your revolution." His rants aren't there to make Enjolras' opinions stronger or to improve the overall messaging of les amis. Grantaire is there because he's kind of a loser who likes to hang out with his friends and is obsessed with one of them in particular. And if you read in between the lines, he is a political radical, but more importantly, he's pathetic. I think it's important to note that the amis don't all have the exact same political opinions. They aren't a political party with a firm set of policies, but a society of like-minded people who share particular goals. You see this in how they hold different levels of extreme disdain for Napoleon, but still understand Marius as being connected to them, and they value his guidance at the barricade when he joins him there.
Ami, je suis gay.
Je suis une femme transgenre.
Je suis pansexuel.
Moi je suis alcoolique. Mes prénoms sont Jack et Daniel. Je m'identifie comme une distillerie. Je bois l'eau, je pisse le whisky. En fait, ça serait plus facile de calculer la quantité de sang que j'ai dans les veines que d'alcool. Même dormir, je ne dors pas. Je récupère pendant mes comas éthyliques.
Fascinating, at least to me. When I see this, I usually assume whoever's invoking this either wants to further express Grantaire's sort of self-medicating yet self-sabotaging nature, depending on what drug is being used. That, or they're too scared to make him an alcoholic, so they make him smoke weed instead because it's a bit more palatable. This is so pervasive that I think it comes as a shock to many that he doesn't actually call Enjolras Apollo in the book. He does refer to him as a fine statue and makes references to Greek and Roman mythology, and Enjolras is referred to being like Apollo in a description before being executed, but Grantaire referring to Enjolras as Apollo simply doesn't happen. I actually found talk about this on LiveJournal from 2003, and I do think it's relevant to say since it's such a huge fanon trope to this day. I was blindsided seeing people in 2003 discussing how it had become so popular that it was even fanon then. I'm not going to give you a lengthy analysis on this because I feel like someone else has really gone into the Artho era of the 2010s, and I'm just gonna keep this as a if you know you know type of thing. But my cat's pissed off about Arthos. The development of the post-2012 Les Mis fandom is obviously concurrent with the aesthetic trends of the time, such as the Artho aesthetic era, the soft grunge revival, indie sleaze, whatever you want to call them. These small aesthetic movements were especially popular on Tumblr, and oftentimes became popular on websites such as that before they entered the mainstream zeitgeist. When people reinterpret stories, you can see aspects of the time period they live in slip into the interpretations. Think about makeup worn by Fantine or Cosette in film adaptations that aren't the most 1830s looks. Think perhaps of whatever the hell's going on in Bridgerton. Now imagine you have a bunch of people in their teens, 20s, and 30s all interested in this same piece of work, all looking to make it make sense with their own lives, to understand the story in a way that translates easily with their own experiences. And you've got this tragic, sarcastic, kind of chaotic character with a homoerotic yearning storyline, and everyone's really honing into the whole artist thing about him, paired with the massive prevalence of modern AUs in the fandom, and he's just so doomed by the narrative that everyone wants to put him in a situation that isn't quite so doomed so that he can explore his yearning in a less lethal environment. You've basically got the perfect storm to project the very essence of Artho's sad boy on this specific Blorbo. Hence the complicated and annoying drunken 19th century cynic with a weird relationship to radical republicanism morphing into the yearning, pining, paint-covered, cigarette-smoking, acoustic guitar-playing young man who wears green hoodies with ripped black skinny jeans and Converse and has a beanie surgically attached to his head. Do you understand what I'm saying here? For the class, I have provided here a visual of a biblically accurate modern AU Grande Terre based on my research observing fan art and also horrifying, embarrassing fan fiction since like 2013. And also since I went to the trouble to recreate modern AU fan and Grande Terre in Canva, I've also decided to make two versions of Fan and Angelas that I commonly encounter. I'm not gonna lie, I made these to mock him, but I actually think these looks kind of rule. When I criticize Fan and Grande Terre, I'm coming from a place of love, you know? I think I've spent so much time ingesting Fan and Grande Terre in as many forms that I formed this kind of parasocial nostalgic connection to him as a concept. Like, to me, this is my old college roommate who I shared many adventures with in the past, and we reconnect on occasion and act like we haven't missed a day. I scroll and occasionally see drawings of a vaguely Dev Patel-looking man in a green hoodie, and I think, oh yes, this is my buddy, my sweet cheese, my rotten soldier, a Blorbo.
Because he's my best friend, he's my pal, he's my homeboy, my rotten soldier, he's my sweet cheese, my good time boy.
Grande Terre of Les Miserables, who is separate from Grande Terre of Les Miserables. And by this I mean that Fan and Grande Terre occupies a different space in my head than Canon Grande Terre. Like, these are separate characters to me. You receive different experiences from a Fan and Grande Terre than you would from opening up the brick and reading a chapter in which Grande Terre appears. Yes, I roll my eyes at some of the tropes that have been assigned to him, but in the end, I can't accuse anyone of being at the Devil's Sacrament, because I was also at the Devil's Sacrament. I'm heading to the next Devil's Sacrament next Friday. And another thing, it's editing Taylor again. I think that one of the reasons that there's such an issue with fanon interpretations that are extremely far away from the actual canon, and how that is such a pervasive issue within the Les Mis fandom is a lot of people in the fandom have not read the book. Which I understand. You can still be a fan, you can be in a fandom if you haven't read the source material. You know, Les Mis is something that has a lot of adaptations. There's a lot of spaces where you can enter as a fan and you can comfortably stay in those spots. You know, you can be a musical only fan. Maybe you watched the 2018 miniseries and that's what got you into the fandom. I don't know. And this happens in a lot of fandoms. You know, I'm a big fan of Interview with the Vampire, and I've only read 2 of the Vampire Chronicles books because I think Anne Rice sucks, but I still consider myself part of the fandom. Like, I get it. But it does still irk me, because oftentimes you'll see people having these discussions over, you know, would a character do this? Would a character say this? Is this thing that we're all talking about, is this canon? And people will be full throttle arguing, yes. And then you click on their profile and they're like, oh, I've never read the fucking book. The book? You want me to read 1,200 pages just to find out whether or not Bossuet is actually bald? And I go, yes, I do want you to read 1,247 pages just to find out whether or not Bossuet is bald. But that's neither here nor there. Just know that there are people out there who are creating this fanon and engaging this fanon and reproducing this fanon and arguing very intensely for this fanon, and they don't know what the canon is. The 2015 novel Noman by Lucia Dertienne follows the relationship between a beautiful assassin in charge of an underground revolutionary organization and an alcoholic artist who follows him like a shadow. Noman was originally a modern AU EXR fanfiction and was later published with the names of Enjolras and Grantaire changed to Émile Deslauriers and Valentine Renner respectively. It has all of the elements of a post-2012 EXR fan work, particularly post-2012 tropes revolving around the character of Grantaire or Renner in this work. Several characters of Les Miserables appear with fanon personalities fully intact, just under different names. To those of us who know what to look for, it is pretty immediately identifiable as a derivative work of Les Miserables. Renner is literally nicknamed R in this book. He calls Emile Apollo, like it's very blatant. But to anyone who has maybe interacted with Les Miserables in passing, or seen the musical once but never interacted with the fandom in any way, would this be identifiable as an adaptation of Les Miserables? Would someone who has, for example, watched the 2018 miniseries or maybe the 1978 movie be able to figure out that this is based on the same book as those movies? Would someone who picked this up in a bookstore be able to figure out the source material at all? Or would they look at you like you have 3 heads? Because how on earth does this pornographic gay romance novel about Interpol tracking down a guy before he enacts a multinational terrorist attack factor into the life of Jean Valjean? The way we interact with Les Miserables has changed very significantly since its publication 163 years ago, which I think is incredible. That there are people who can find new and exciting ways to look at it, discuss it, and relate it to the modern day. And the fact that readers have been doing this time and time again since the 19th century fucking rocks. I also think that the Les Mis fandom is a very, very odd fandom. Because what do you mean this is an ongoing fandom of very dedicated people, once again, 160 years after its publication? And it's still changing. To the extent that sometimes fan interpretations of the material don't even really make sense with the source material. Or the interests of the fans are just so hyper-specific that they simply ignore the wider story. And I implicate myself with this. I'm involved. I can't act like I don't envision the alcoholic artist with curly black hair and maybe some stubble when I think about this book, knowing full well that the person I'm envisioning isn't even that relevant to the story, nor is he even really described in the way that I see him in my head. But I know why I see him that way in my head. I know why he's there. I know why he jumps to the forefront of my mind when I think about the book. Les Miserables runs anywhere between 1,000 to 1,900 pages, depending on the translation and the formatting of the text. And instead of talking about literally anything else from the book, I'm sitting here talking about a side character who only appears in a subsection of the story. When you look up the book on fandom websites, you are inundated with fan art and edits of this side character, who looks suspiciously like an actor who played him in a movie over a decade ago. I can't even fathom trying to explain this to a reader of Les Miserables in like 1910. Like the massive importance that Grantaire would have on readers in the 21st century. A character who doesn't even make it to the vast majority of adaptations. A character whose role is oftentimes written off because, quite frankly, he doesn't really have an impact on Cosette, and that's who we're here for. I don't think George Blagden is solely responsible for the recent changes in how the fandom interacts with the work. I think there's a myriad of things that came together at just the right moment, which led to this sort of unexpected fandom explosion, a Les Miserables Big Bang of sorts. But I also think that George Blagden was a huge part of this, not just by how his portrayal of Grantaire left a massive impression on fans despite his small role, but also by his small moments of continued dedication to the character after the fact. That's impact. That's legacy. And we owe it all to George Blagden being kind of insane. If you watch this video to the end, there's something wrong with you. I don't know what to say. There's something wrong with me, but I knew that already. I mean, for fuck's sake, I bought this book. But thank you. I'm hoping to eventually make another video about Les Mis. When I was talking about different book adaptations or book like sequels of Les Mis, there was one very specific one I didn't mention. And it caused a lawsuit, and I'm planning on reading it, and then I would like to talk about it because I think it's going to be really bad. So if I read that, I will make a video of it. And if you never see me ever again, it's because the book killed me. So we'll see.